Welcome everyone and thank you for joining us today. In this presentation we will be discussing the application of the Value Creation Wheel Framework to Net4CO2, which is a leading organization in the carbon capture industry. Here you will see how this methodology helped us address one of the main challenges for a successful go-to-market strategy. Our team addressed the challenge of prioritizing the most impactful research line for Net4CO2. We used the value creation wheel method to evaluate a range of potential solutions and ultimately present our recommendations. Throughout this process, we involved key decision makers from the organization and gathered valuable insight from critical stakeholders. We would like to express our gratitude to all members of the organization who contributed with their time and expertise to this project. Okay, so in today's presentation, we will first provide an introduction to the general context of the company, the industry in which it operates, and the case of our study. Then we will go through the 5 phases of the Value Creation Wheel Framework, which are defining the surrounding, increasing understanding, assessing potential ideas, narrowing solutions, and finally the action plan. Lastly, we will wrap up with a summary and key takeaways from our analysis and recommendations for the Net4CO2. Okay, so firstly, we would like to do a general background of the situation and highlight what's the importance of climate tech, which is the kind of technology that Net4CO2 is developing in fighting back and containing global warming. So half of the world's population resides in regions that are extremely vulnerable to climate change, and therefore the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is the IPCC, has warned that if global temperatures rise above 1.5 degrees, then irreparable harm would be done to the planet and its species. As a result of this, here on the graph we can see that many nations have pledged, including the top 3, which are responsible for more than 50% of all global emissions, have pledged to reach some targets in the future, specifically by 2050, which is the target is to reach zero emissions by that time. It's important to highlight that our current policies and objectives from the government and businesses, even though they are very ambitious, it's only allowing us to reach 2.9 arisal in terms of global warming. This it's not enough to reach the targets, and this current path would be devastating, would be a result of devastating catastrophes such as the collapse of the marine ecosystems or the arisal in sea levels. So for this, it's important to rely on technologies to accelerate the process and try to reach these targets as soon as possible. Now, after addressing the general background of the situation, we now decided to deep dive into knowing which were the sources of global greenhouse gas emissions. To do so, we relied on a report by the European Environmental Agency, which showed that only the sectors of energy supply, domestic transportation, and industrial manufacturing were responsible for more than 60% of these emissions globally. And now, following the path of the counteract on how the climate tech is fighting back these negative impacts, we found that renewable energies would be a main source of the world's power by the year 2035. On the other hand, we found that the industrial sector would be a very promising target for Net4CO2, as policies have made the implementation of CCUS technologies prerequisite in this specific area. Okay, now we would like to do the introduction of the company. So Net4CO2 is a collaborative laboratory and a private non-profit association composed by different private companies, research and development institutes and universities in Portugal. Their aim is to create new processes and products to contribute significantly to reaching a sustainable circular economy of the CO2. To achieve their mission of encouraging research and development, creating models for science and technological development, They developed they have developed different kind of technologies or ways to address this circular economy of the CO2. These basically were divided in three main branches, which were the carbon capture technologies directly, then utilization branch, which was mainly products that contained the recycled CO2 or the captured CO2, and finally some desalination technologies also. Throughout this project, we would guide you through how we implemented the value creation wheel framework in order to address the main challenge, which was knowing which branch to develop further in order to reach the future stages of the development of the company, which would be the product launch in the market, since they are now located in a testing and redefining stage, and they are preparing to enter the markets with their products, their services, and their technologies. Okay, now here we're going to explain very briefly what's the theory behind the value creation wheel and how it helped us to find and capture value and address the challenge of Net4CO2 in this case. So the value creation wheel methodology consists on 5 phases. Phase 1 focuses on defining the setting and challenge to be addressed, along with the formulating expected key performance indicators. Phase 2 involves generating ideas to solve the problem, setting criteria for filtering ideas, and simplifying the concepts for easy use. In our case, we didn't generate particularly the ideas, but we relied on our ideas were basically the products or services that the company was offering to the market, was planning to offer to the market. So in phase 3 then is where the key decision makers select the ideas and filters and then assign a rank to each selected filter. Then on phase 4, which is the heart of the VCW, all the ideas are passed through the value creation funnel, and there's at last one resulting final idea, which is the one who is going to structure the concept and is the one that's going to be used in the later phase, which is the final one. And the whole idea of the phase 5 is to create a business model and specify a specific plan for the implementation of the idea. Then by following this methodology, we can systematically address challenges and capture value for the organization.
Alright, so let's start with the application of the value creation wheel to the topic that we have. We will dive into phase 1 now, where we diagnose the surroundings, we also set the challenge, and we will also guide you through the key performance indicators and objectives that we have set either for this project, but also for mid and long term. So before we get going with the diagnostic part, we would like to show you how our analytical process went and what we did actually to diagnose the current situation. So we applied several strategic and economic frameworks to get a deep understanding of either the macro and micro environmental forces, but also about the company. So for the macro environmental forces, we assessed them to better understand the factors that are out of the control by the company, but they will most likely have an influence on the business decisions. So here we took the pestle analysis for the macro environmental forces. So for the micro environmental forces, moving on to that, we ran a Porter's 5 forces analysis. We also did a competitor analysis to uncover the factors that directly influence our strategic outlook. So they're a bit more into the strategic dimensions and towards the core of the innovation planning. On the third step, we actually dived into the company. We did a company analysis that uncovered the technological potential and the strengths and advantages that could play into your favor. We did a SWOT and TOES analysis as well as a company overview. And lastly, we also discovered possible stakeholders that needed to be involved and did a stakeholder mapping of how to manage those stakeholders closely. and remotely. So let's start with the macro environmental forces, and as we've said before, we've conducted a pastoral analysis to create an overview of all the external factors that Net4CO2 is exposed to. And hereby we looked at either political factors, we also looked at economic and social factors, we looked at the technology status right now, we looked at the environmental factors, and also we considered legal aspects into that analysis. And as you can see here, the setting to take upon environmental challenge is twofold, and I will explain you why in a second. So for the political aspects, it can be said that there is very high political interest to protect climate and to increase the climate protection. However, there are certain economic factors such as rising interest rates, inflation, but also the economic effects of the Russia-Ukraine war. They slow down growth, so that high interest and that high drive from political and legislative actors, this offset by the rising inflation and the economic effects. For social, it can be said, at least for Portugal, that the Portuguese people, they expect the national government to tackle climate change. And you can see that with the politicians reacting to the environmental and social pressure by setting specific targets towards carbon neutrality. So you have the political frame, but also you have the economic frame from the governments in terms of incentives and tax reductions to set the economic frame for companies contributing to a reduction of greenhouse gas, which is in general quite supportive. However, this has yet to be solidified in legal and regulatory frameworks, as you can see in the bottom. The Paris Agreement is there, it's legally binding, but it may actually not be achievable with the current policies as we've seen before. And also there are certain other legal aspects that have yet to be mentioned. Especially in Portugal, the pressure on companies to reduce emission increases, and we can see here why. In 2019, the carbon intensity by Portugal was 22% above the EU average, but there are certain technological advancements in Europe, but Portugal is considerably behind in comparison with these Europe top climate tech countries. In general, there is the trend of the digitalization and the automation and technology, and carbon capture, utilization and storage, CCUS, is scaling ever so slightly. Innovation is necessary to hedge against the increased vulnerability to climate change that Portugal is actually exposed to. So to further assess the environment Net4CO2 is exposed to, we ran a Porter's 5 forces analysis. So we looked at the micro-environmental forces addressing the company. And this analysis served the purpose of understanding the competitive environment of the climate tech industry. So on the right, you can see 4 major forces. So you can see the threat of new entrants. You can see the bargaining power that the suppliers have. There's also the bargaining power that customers have. And there's a threat of substitutes. The last part of the Porter's 5 forces framework is competitive rivalry, but we will assess this in the next slides as we want to look at the competition a bit more into detail. So looking at the analysis, we assessed the threat of new entrants as a very low threat level, and that is essentially because there's large investments required, either financially but also production-wise and human resource-wise, so for R&D. So the investment needed to move into the climate tech industry is so high that the threat of new entrants is quite low. It's different for the bargaining power suppliers, and that is because of several reasons. But the major reason is that within climate tech, companies are very dependent on very unique and rare materials. So the technologies that are being produced, they rely on unique components and extensive R&D. So there's a limited number of suppliers, and the lower the number of suppliers is, the higher the power is that they have on the business. Looking onto the customer side, so for the bargaining power of customers, we've assessed the threat level to be medium, and that is because, of course, customers are required to reduce greenhouse gases, as we speak of B2B customers, but also there is not enough options at the moment to really decide between options. So there the power is low because there's less substitutes, but also they have to buy it, so they will make the choice. So they have a quite high power on the company, and both are offsetting. So we assess this to be a medium level. And for the threat of substitutes, at the moment it's actually quite low. There is not enough technologies on the market to speak of product competition, but also we can see that the speed of acceleration is quite high. The speed of innovation is accelerating. So we will assume that in the future there is quite a high number of substitutes available. So we assess this as a medium threat level. And what conclusions can be drawn from the Porter's 5 forces analysis? So we've looked at how attractive the climate tech industry is for startups, and then more specifically for which types of startups. So as I've said before, there is a large resource requirement needed to be able to move into the startups. So the early stage characteristic of the climate tech industry is thereby characterized. And that leads to the fact that scaling for startups is quite difficult at the moment. It's limited at the moment, but not bad for the future, because the speed of innovation is accelerating. As I've also said, the advanced technologies, they ask for a unique component and extensive R&D, so there's a high financial investment needed, which makes it quite unattractive for non-profit startups. So that leaves us with the last type of startup, which is a buyable startup. And that actually makes sense because to generate an innovation drive, outside expertise is crucial. So you can't do everything on your own. You need sort of business angels and also other external companies and stakeholders to develop and to prove your ideas, right? So that's why the main goal should be for Net4CO2 or also for companies that move into the climate tech industry to develop technologies and that then eventually getting bought out by a larger investor or a larger business angel from outside. The fifth and final force that Porter is talking about in his framework is competitive rivalry, and we would like to split this up into two parts. First, we will talk about the global CCUS landscape, so global competitors, and on the next slide we will talk about the Portuguese CCUS landscape, so the local CCUS landscape. And by looking at the global competitors, you can see that the largest competitors sit in China and in the US, while Europe is actually the leading region in terms of investments. And there has been a report by the Energy Digital magazine, and that looked at the top 10 carbon capture companies globally by the amount of carbon captured per year in ton. And leading that ranking is Carbfix, and they produce around 1 billion tons captured per lifetime, which is quite a lot. And the company's approach to CCS involves injecting captured CO2 into basaltic rock formations. So that's actually a carbon storage company. Second on the ranking is Carbon Free, and the products that they produce are there to capture CO2 to create useful chemicals. And third, following Carbfix and Carbon Free, is Shell Canada, so a quite large company, and they actually invest into projects that lead towards CCUS. So they operate the Quest CCS, for example. It's a project that captures and stores CO2 from bitumen upgrader plant in Alberta, Canada, and they capture around 1.2 million tons per year. So when we look at the company size of the competitors, we can see that China and the US heritage the largest companies that operate some sort of CCUS projects, right? So the United States is also the leading country in terms of government investment, but then that is closely followed by Netherlands, Germany, and Norway, representing Europe's strong funding of CCUS projects. So when we narrow down the scope of the competitor analysis and look towards a more local CCUS competitor landscape, we can see that 4 main Portuguese competitors emerge that have developed or are developing CCUS technologies. And surprisingly, we can see that Galp can also be considered as a competitor. And we will see in a second that Galp is the largest, so to say, shareholder, Exxon shareholder of the company with 84% shares in Net4CO2. But it can also be considered as a competitor because it's a Portuguese oil and gas company that not only has a share in Net4CO2, but it also additionally has partnered with other projects. So there is the Norwegian company Equinor on a carbon capture and storage project that they have accounted on in the North Sea. And there's a project that's called the Northern Lights that aims to capture and store carbon dioxide emissions from industrial facilities in Europe. So the same as Net4CO2 is doing. Then there's also EDP, and EDP is a Portuguese energy company that is investing in renewable energy and carbon capture and storage technologies. And the company is a partner in the H2 Science project, which aims to develop a green hydrogen production facility in the port of Sines or Science using carbon capture and storage technology. On the right, we have LNEG, and LNEG is a Portuguese research institute. So we have a second research institute here that is involved in research and development of carbon capture and storage technologies, just as the other companies are. The institute has several ongoing projects. For example, we have the C4G project, and that aims to develop a carbon capture and storage infrastructure in Portugal. And last but not least, we have Bondalti, and Bondalti is a Portuguese chemical company that is involved in the carbon capture and utilization part as well. And that company has developed technologies that captures carbon dioxide emissions from the industrial processes internally. So these four main competitors are present at the moment and should be monitored specifically on their development of technologies and their innovation pace. So the third part of diagnosing the initial situation of this value creation framework is conducting a company analysis. So we have started by looking at the macro environmental forces, the external factors. We've moved one step closer by looking at the industry and the micro environmental forces. And now we even move one step closer towards the core of our analysis by looking specifically at Net4CO2. So as Juan has talked about before, Net4CO2 essentially is a collaborative, non-profit laboratory that innovates climate tech. So Net4CO2 is a collab that focuses on creating sustainable industrial solutions, and by that they respond to the challenge for climate neutrality in 2050. So according to the company, the Net4CO2 strategy is to promote a CO2 circular economy, and they have two complementary objectives. The first objective is that Net4CO2 wants to offer a more efficient and cost-effective alternative technology to carbon capture and storage to industrial producers. So the client scope is industrial producers here. And the second objective is that they want to develop processes that add value to the captured greenhouse gases, or GHGs. So within these two objectives, key process routes are defined and corresponding technological solutions will be proposed, as Net4CO2 says. And under these two fundamental objectives, the initial focus is given to four main industrial processes. So they are researching on the cleaning air from CO2. They are also searching on how can you convert this CO2 into syngas, so synthetic gases. Then how can you take these syngas to convert this into e-fuels? And lastly, how can they purify water to make use for electricity? So in general, the main goal is to address global challenges in the industry and energy field and create innovative technologies for a sustainable CO2 economy. So as we saw, the main goal of Net4CO2 is to develop technologies that work towards a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. And currently, the company conducts research in 3 different areas, and they are all connected to carbon capture, utilization, and storage. Carbon capture hereby refers to the process of capturing CO2 emissions from industrial processes, so out of flue gas. There are several forms of capturing CO2 emissions. However, Net4CO2 focuses on a process that is called direct air capturing, and that is a form of capturing CO2 out of flue gas, mainly derived from industrial plants. There are 2 direct air capture technologies that are developed by Net4CO2, which is HGTS AirPure and AGTS AirPure. And the CO2 that has been captured through flue gas and through the CO2 capture technologies, they can then either be stored permanently, which is the storage part of CCUS, but it can also be utilized by enriching it with other elements such as H2, water, or methane to create products that can be processed into e-fuels, for example, to be used in transportation. Additionally, the products that emerge out of CO2 utilization can be used in the chemical industry and for other industrial or residential heating. So there's quite a wide variety of products that use CO2 that is captured out of the air. There's also a third and different research line that Net4CO2 is currently developing, and that is called HGTS Water Pure, and that is developed to desalinate seawater and generate pure water that can be used in multiple ways. Now that we have an understanding of what the line of business actually is for Net4CO2, we would like to touch on some of the strengths, the weaknesses, but also the opportunities and threats that the company possess before we actually draw some strategic conclusions from this. So looking at the strength of Net4CO2, there is actually two major strengths that we have uncovered, and one is that Net4CO2 possesses a competitive advantage. And that competitive advantage roots in the HR and in the R&D department. So there's very qualified HR. We have synergies between the companies, also the R&D institutions and the universities that create a strong network for research and development. And the technology may be integrated into the variety of business models. The second strength that we have uncovered is a more pressing one, and that is that there are environmental benefits associated with the product that Net4CO2 is developing. So as the public concern for environment increases, carbon capture and utilization reduces carbon emissions, and it helps to combat climate change. Now, there is also a growing demand, so the increasing portfolio of high-value technological projects and registered patents in both domestic and international markets can be a strength for Net4CO2. However, there are also a few weaknesses, and most of them are connected to the weaknesses of the climate tech industry in general. So, for example, there is high costs. So carbon capture, storage, and utilization technologies are very expensive to develop, and they are also expensive to implement for the clients. There is also some technological challenges. So usually climate tech is very complex, and it is a very challenging process. So the time to market for technologies can be a bit more extensive. And there is also the lack of focus on a specific research line at the moment. So 9 different research lines are being developed at the moment. So there might be a lack of focus for the company. Also, the project success will depend on external collaboration, as they are a non-profit R&D lab, and they could be having difficulties in attracting and retaining HR. However, there are also some opportunities that arise for Net4CO2, and the major opportunity that arises is that the demand for sustainable solutions is growing a lot, and that creates new opportunities to expand into new markets and industries, as there might be new technologies emerging in the future. Also, there's the opportunity for partnerships and collaborations. So Net4CO2 at the moment is having quite a lot of partnerships, but there's obviously also the opportunity of increasing those partnerships. So collaborating with other companies and organizations can provide access to new technologies, new expertise, and also new resources. The third opportunity that we have here is innovation. So a continued investment in R&D can lead to new innovations. So there is public and private spending on energy and R&D, and that is projected to increase. So that continued investment can be used to innovate further. Looking at the threats, we have 2 major threats that Net4CO2 needs to take care of and needs to consider when setting the strategy. One is the competition. So as we've discovered in the Porter's 5 forces analysis, it's very the rivalry within the climate tech industry is very competitive. So the industry is becoming more competitive, as we see, with new companies and also pilot projects entering the market. And now, because there's also the government demand of increasing the technologies and reducing greenhouse gas emissions, that industry is actually quite eager to gain new companies into that industry. And also there's a public perception, so there might be safety concerns that are always associated with technologies, and there also might be negative perceptions or lack of awareness actually of the technology, where you might need some stakeholders to step in to increase the awareness. But of course, only looking at the SWOT analysis doesn't help. We also have to draw some strategic conclusions from that. And we will now look at which opportunities and which strength they can use to offset weaknesses and maybe to hedge against threats. So one strength that goes in hand with opportunities that arise is that the company should leverage the company's expertise to gain a competitive advantage in the market and expand into new markets and into new industries. They should also collaborate with other companies, as this will help implement new technologies and innovate within the industry. There are a few strengths that can offset the threats that Net4CO2 is exposed to. We have talked about the differentiation being needed, so the company needs to build on the strong reputation it has to focus on sustainability, to differentiate it from competitors and increase the market share. And they should also invest in research and development to stay ahead of emerging competitors that might come into the industry in the future. Also, there are some opportunities that can be used to offset the weakness the company has. So one opportunity is to partner with other companies to access new technologies, and that can help the company overcome one of the weaknesses. Also, it should focus on cost reduction strategies to make the company's carbon capture, storage, and utilization technologies way more affordable and thus more competitive in the market. Also, there is a combination of threats and weaknesses, and that is very dangerous to the company. And to offset this, the company should focus on building strong partnerships and collaborations, again, very important, to help overcome the technology and, for instance, also the regulatory challenges. They should also invest more in research and development to stay ahead of the competition and to keep pace with emerging technologies. So the last part of the diagnostic part of the value creation wheel phase 1 is dedicated towards a stakeholder analysis. And we kick things off by doing a stakeholder map. So on here, you can see that the key decision makers form the center of the company, as these are the president, the vice president, and the C-level management. And then on the left, you can see the external stakeholders. And on the right, we have put the internal stakeholders. So all of these stakeholders need to be considered when moving forward. And on the left, the external stakeholders, the majority, or let's say the most important part right here is the government, because they set the legislative framework. They also provide funding, and they have their political interest in reducing the greenhouse gas emissions. So for government stakeholders in Portugal, we have the Ministry of Environment and Climate Action. We also have the Directorate General for Energy and Geology. Third, we have the Portuguese Environmental Agency, which is probably the most important stakeholder of the government part. We have the ANI, the FCT, and we also have LPEC. So the second largest part of the external stakeholder is formed by the business community. So business community refers to any organization, any company that also works towards the same goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So there you can have NGOs, you can have financial institutions that might be important for funding, you have engineering firms that can help in research and development, you have other energy companies that can also serve as suppliers, but also simultaneously can make up some of your potential new clients, and you have the technology providers. And the third aspect of the external stakeholders is media. So media is quite crucial for the promotional mix, as we can see in the end, but it also helps you spread the word and also gain attention and momentum, which is quite important to scale for startups. So for media, we have certain radios, RTP in Portugal, we have communication agencies in Lusa, we have some newspapers in Público and Observador, We also have another communication agency, and we have Apron, that's a promotion agency that can all help you to gain some momentum in the media and get some positive press. So right of the KDMs is the internal stakeholder fraction, and that is composed by 4 parts: the suppliers, the investors, the current clients, and also the partner universities. So for suppliers, we have Paralab, Schlumberger, P10, Saipem, and Ricardo Eberborsa. For investors, we actually have 6 major investors right now, and the most important, or the largest shareholder, so to speak, is Galp at the moment with about 50%, so 48 to be precise, followed by Change Partners and the FEUP, which is the University of Porto. So then, speaking of universities, we have other partner universities. We have University of Coimbra, for example. We have the Nova University as a partner, but also international universities such as Bucharest and the Serena. So for clients, it's a quite small landscape right now, and we're not quite sure if we can even consider them to be clients, but we have included them as you had them in the presentation. So we have, for example, Unicamp and BA, just to mention 2 of the 6 clients that you have at the moment. But again, these are very, very small companies, and can also be considered partners for right now. And to expand your client landscape is also a major goal that we have and that we want to address later on. So when we take a closer look onto the stakeholder map that we've done in the previous slide, we can see that some appear to be more important to manage than others. So some stakeholders need more attention than other stakeholders might need, and that is simply because there is a different allocation of interest and power into the business. So interest basically refers into the interest a company has into the business of Net4CO2. So they might draw direct and indirect benefits, but they also could be negatively influenced if the company doesn't perform well. And for power, that basically refers to the power a company or a stakeholder can have on the business of Net4CO2. So the stakeholders can directly influence the outcome of the business, either in a good or also in a bad way. And so then you can take the stakeholders that we have from the stakeholder map on the previous slide, and we can apply this to Net4CO2. And we can see that there are some stakeholders that should be managed closely, which is basically the major shareholders in Galp and Change Partners and FEUP. But there's also the local government and the national government that puts quite the high pressure on Net4CO2 to perform well, and also has a high interest in Net4CO2 performing well. And then there's obviously other regional organizations that need to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, so that they could also have a high interest in Net4CO2, but they would also serve as a client, so they have quite the high power. So moving on to the stakeholders that Net4CO2 should keep informed, which is basically the regional government, Paralab, which is the supplier, and then the local media and the regional organizations, because they all have quite the high power on the business to set legislative, but also to influence the public perception of the company, but they might not have the highest interest because there are other companies that have a higher interest. So moving away from the high power stakeholder side to the low power stakeholder side, and looking at the interests. So there are certain stakeholders such as the Technical Lisboa, the INL, different universities, also employees that have a high interest in the company, and clients that have less power than the major clients. So these ones are the ones that have to be kept satisfied. And to monitor, we have the global government, we have some other suppliers that might not be the largest suppliers, and we have the global media, which is harder to reach, so they should be kept monitored. But these stakeholders are also relevant for us as a project, so to increase the amount of research that we can do to get data and also to validate the statements that we have, we aim to include these stakeholders that we've talked about throughout the process by ourselves. So there are 2 main stages where we want to include our stakeholders. The first stage is the phase 1, as we want there to get a thorough overview on the topic and aim to include each individual perspective. And the second important phase to include the stakeholders will be in phase 4A, which is the heart of the value creation wheel, where we will be applying the value creation funnel. So therefore we need certain thresholds to be set, and that is also a phase where it's valuable to include the stakeholders' perspective and also ideas to set thresholds. However, we will have to see in which parts we are able to include stakeholders directly, or if we have to switch to secondary data, so data that we can find from the stakeholders on the internet or in secondary data. And that is because of two reasons. The first reason is that the project that Net4CO2 is aiming to work on has not yet been made public. So we face the issue of a non-disclosure agreement that we didn't have to sign, but we want to be as protective as possible about the whole process. So we have to be careful who to involve directly and thus notify about it. And the second problem that we face here is that the time frame of the value creation wheel process that we have allows for only 1 week per phase that we can work on, and that means it will make it difficult to set up meetings with the corresponding stakeholders in time. Let us now move on to the second part of phase 1. So after we've conducted the diagnostic part, we will now dive a bit more into the challenge that is underlying this value creation wheel method and see which problems should be fixed. So over the course of the first phase of the value creation wheel method, we have already briefly encountered the main challenge that is underlying this whole project, and that is that Portugal is significantly exposed to climate change and very vulnerable to climate change due to the location. So it's close to the sea, and it also has a very hot temperature in the summer. And Net4CO2, as we've already learned, currently develops 9 technologies that contribute towards the goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions in Portugal to stop climate change. And with their mission, they're not the only ones, and they actually contribute towards 4 agreements that are already being set. So there is a Paris Agreement, there's the RNC 250, we have the European Green Deal, and the United Nations have also set SDG goals that all work towards the goal of tackling climate change. And the following 4 key problems that I will now mention, they are being addressed within this value creation wheel method. So first we have climate change, and carbon neutrality is seen as a critical step in mitigating and addressing the root cause of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. We also work towards securing energy, so by investing in renewable and low carbon energy sources, countries can increase their energy security and reduce their dependence on important fossil fuels. We also work towards creating a more sustainable development, so by reducing carbon emissions and transitioning to more sustainable energy sources, countries can promote economic growth and development while ensuring viability of the planet. And last but not least, reducing carbon emissions also lead to clean air and more cleaner air, and that will also increase the public health. But what exactly is the challenge that we are trying to solve within this value creation wheel? Because we cannot solve the challenge of climate change, but what is it? So within the Net4CO2 research areas, there are 9 different research lines, as we can see below. And current research is focused on all 9 of these, but continuing all 9 research lines with the same intensity is unsustainable for Net4CO2. So eventually, Net4CO2 aims to commercialize one of these 9 research lines. And our challenge is to find out which research lines should Net4CO2 prioritize to be competitive in carbon capture, utilization, and desalination. And with that challenge, there are certain questions that arise. So one question is, which research line is most attractive for commercialization under different circumstances? But also which research line has the best external environment that Net4CO2 can capitalize on. To conclude phase 1, we will now move into the expected key performance indicators and to see which objectives we have set for this journey. As you can see, we have set multiple objectives for this journey, and all these objectives have been set in accordance with the key decision makers of Net4CO2 and also all members of the group. And the objectives that we've set, they fall under three categories. We have business objectives, we've also set technology objectives, and finally we've set group objectives or individual objectives, and they are all accompanied by specific key performance indicators to measure the outcome precisely. We've not only separated the objectives into three main categories, but we have also separated them by time. So we have short, medium, and long-term objectives. Short-term objectives are meant to be accomplished by the end of the current year, so 2023. And for the group objectives, we have set them to be accomplished by the end of completing this value creation wheel method. We have medium-term objectives, and they focus on a time frame from 1 to 5 years, while long-term objectives are more of strategic nature and they need to be considered when setting a strategy that goes beyond the time frame of 5 years. Overall, it can be said that all of the objectives, they work towards one main objective, one common goal that we have and that is to create a concept for a successful technology launch that helps reduce the greenhouse gas emissions in Portugal. So, to go a bit more into detail about the objectives, for the business side, we suggest that in short term, so by the end of this year, the necessary funding for the technology should be secured to be developed. And then also the whole concept that we will propose to the company today should gain stakeholder approval. So all the stakeholders should pass a vote. For the technology, the industrial prototype should be created quite soon. And we also suggest to validate after-sales services that will enrich the product. Looking at the group objectives for short term, we set the objective to adhere to the schedules that we have, so to meet our deadlines and also to be quite satisfied with the outcome of the project. Now, looking more into the medium-term KPIs, we are aiming for the product market launch in 1 to 5 years, and we also suggest to develop self-sufficient operations. For technology, the market readiness of the technology should be ensured and scalability should be improved. And for individual goals, we aim to gain knowledge of the climate tech industry, and we also want to be the best performing group in class. Looking at the strategic objectives that we've set, for the business side, we set the objective to be profitable beyond 5 years. And we also plan to scale internationally and generate international sales revenues and move out of Portugal. For technology, an overall reduction of greenhouse gas emissions in Portugal is set as an objective, and that is accompanied by reducing the production cost per unit. For our personal goals, long-term goals, we want to apply the value creation wheel in the work context, and also gain an extended understanding of the value creation process that goes beyond the value creation wheel method.
So now let's dive deep into phase 2, where we are going to come up with ideas to solve our major challenge, some criteria to assess them, and finally apply the poker method to reach the final filters that are ready and crucial to be applied. So I guess we were joking regarding coming up with ideas, because the challenge proposed by Net4CO2 has a very specific nature, a very technological and scientific nature. So the possible ideas that we could come up correspond to the 9 research lines that we already presented before on slide 15. So you can go back to slide 15 to check them, or you can take a look to the wheel on the right of this slide, where all the 9 available research lines are also presented. And now let's talk about the criteria. Here, as you may see, we started by dividing the criteria into 5 different areas. So the 5 different C's, we start with company, we have customer, competitor, collaborators, and finally climate. When we talk about company-related criteria, as this case of Net4CO2 is very specific and very scientific, most of the criteria organization, let's call it this way, most of the boxes in which we split the criteria are related with technology. So such as readiness level, relevance for the future, and adaptability of the technology. So because the Net4CO2 scope and challenge are pretty scientific, as I said, we also considered as well some financial and production criteria for the sake of the company's economic activity, like how much can it produce, dependency on suppliers, break-even point, production costs, etc. So therefore we try to simultaneously assess filters regarding the tech reality that is very present on this situation and the company's capacity and limitations to join the possible markets as a producer ready to supply. Customers' criteria purpose was to address potential customers. So we know that companies cannot survive without profits, and those come from customers. So therefore, it is crucial to analyze this part of the market. So we should analyze the buying process, the market size regarding the number of potential consumers, financial criteria and opportunities related to them, and finally address their level of satisfaction regarding the existing solutions, which is always helpful to understand in which research line to invest, and also when we consider it not just a criteria to filter the research lines, we can also take a look at it as a possibility for improvement in those research lines in a perspective of co-creation. When we talk about competitor-related criteria, it compromises the ability to distinguish from the other players in the industry and present a unique value proposition. Here we consider resources, strengths and weaknesses, the competitive environment, and all those situations that will help us understand how to gain a competitive advantage in the industry, and in which industry will it be easier and more helpful to do it. So this will help us understand how could Net4CO2 move and where should it invest regarding the possible research lines in order to create a sustainable growth strategy in the market. So here in collaborator criteria, it will help us to assess the level of dependency on external agents and the capabilities of those external agents, meaning suppliers, distributors and investors. So the easier the relationship, the more potential agents to interact with, the more companies that are ready and correspond to our criteria to be our partners, our collaborators. So the more options we have and the better they are, the better will be also for the company, as it will face lower bargaining power from outside forces. Last but not least, we have climate criteria. It will help us to understand the non-market environment. It is kind of the pestle of the criteria, because we have social criteria, economical, technological and legal, and finally we also had the government criteria. To conclude phase 2, we have what the model itself calls the purification of concepts.
Okay, so at this point I would quickly like to step in to explain you the purification of the concepts that we did. So we used the poker method because we have come up with 94 filters, as you have known before, but we had to reduce it due to the very large number of filters that we had. So what did we do? We applied the poker method, and in the first step we inserted all the developed criteria that we had. In the second step, we assessed the data availability that we could find on the criteria. And on a third step, we made an assessment of the level of importance. So how important is the criteria to us in terms of market launch? And in the fourth step, we combined all the data that we had and all the numbers that we had to come up with a poker method. Now, it's important to mention here that we used two types of sources, or two ways to look at the problem. And the first way that we did was we assessed all the data and the level of importance as a group, and independently we sent the same Excel file to Net4CO2. So by that we ensured that both assessments, either by us or by Net4CO2, were made independently from another. And then in the fourth step, we combined both to see where we overlap and where we had differences to Net4CO2. And we came up with a ranking score that you can find in the attached Excel file to see which filters should be kept, which should be multiplied, which should be killed, and which filters should be reviewed. And then we passed on with only 84 keep filters that we could find.
On phase 3, we will select only the relevant filter for our analysis by applying the poker method and involving stakeholders in order to rank the filter efficiently. At the beginning on this phase, we will present to you the selected idea for the solution. As we said before, we will consider all the research line given by Net4CO2 to our solution. We consider all technologies of the three most important categories. How you can see here, CO2 capture and separation, CO2 utilization and desalination. Now we will evaluate each filter and select the ones we think is the most important for our analysis. We got 14A filter and each member of the team applied the poker method. So at the end, we could better decide which filter multiply, keep, review or kill. On this slide, we can see an example of criteria that we selected in this process. In the Excel sheet, you can find a whole list of this type of criteria. We select 18 out of 14A filter to be used in the value creation funnel. So, as the first thing, we select the criteria and then we proceed with the poker method. Here, we decide, for example, to keep the market cycle criteria, and to finalize the selection, we implement this process by asking to Net4CO2 to evaluate the importance of the criteria of 0 to 5. From the keep filter resulting from the poker method, only those that Net4CO2 gave a score of 5 were chosen to answer the implementation possibilities of the criteria. To finalize our phase 3, the team decided with the stakeholder on the degree of importance of the filter we keep. On this phase, we will rank the filter to use them in the next phase. To rank the global filter, we keep in mind the types of the technology and the target market. To gauge the significance of the selected criteria, Net4CO2 was consulted to categorize the previously chosen criteria into must-have and nice-to-have criteria. Within the must-have category, Net4CO2 was assigned the task of ranking the criteria on a scale of 1 to 10, which 1 indicating the most crucial criterion as preceded by the research lab and 10 representing the least important criteria. As a result, we rank 9 must-have criteria, who you can see in the right side of the slide. These criteria will be then used in the phase 4. The phase 4 aims to apply the previously ranked filter to finally identify the best technology to develop by Net4CO2. In this phase, we will try to understand the value creation stage and we will start with the value creation funnel. So, our team conducted an analysis on how to set thresholds for the selected criteria. In the right side of the slide, we can see the different thresholds that we found by analyzing the main data and information of the criteria that we selected in the previous phase. Also, in the appendix, you can find a full explanation of each threshold. So finally, the selected idea passes through the ranked filter and through the optional weighted filter until the final solution were found. With the multi-criteria decision analysis, we can see which technology passed the threshold and which no. We select the HETS Airpur as the chosen technology for the business model because it passed all the filters. AGTS Airpur also passed 7 filters but failed in the investment
Okay,
attractiveness
guys, so
filter.
then moving on to phase 4, where we actually talk about what came out of our value creation funnel, then talk about how we concept our product and the value proposition, and then also about the product type that we define. Okay, so basically what we found out is that the air pure technology is the winner within our value creation funnel. And Net4CO2 has developed this net mix as an innovative technology for air purification that utilizes a network of static mixers to capture CO2 through a mix of liquid and gases. And opposed to other conventional CO2 capturing technologies, the air pure plant is significantly smaller due to the small size of net mix plates that can be stacked onto each other. You can see here on the left-hand side an example of such a plate. And basically you can stack as many plates onto each other as you want. The air pure is able to capture 1 ton of CO2 per hour, which provides the same efficiency as conventional carbon capture technologies, but on a much smaller footprint. Here also on the right-hand side, you can see an overview as a comparison between the air pure and other technologies, and you can see that the air pure, the net mix, is specifically more efficient in terms of energy consumption, capital costs, operating costs, and also environmental impact. Hence, overall, the air pure has a low environmental impact and energy consumption due to its size advantages. Okay, so moving on, the question that we're facing then is to ask, okay, in which sector, in which industry do we want to sell the air pure technology? And what we did here is then to check on, okay, which sectors actually have the highest current GHG emissions in Portugal. And what we found out is that given the scale of the challenge towards Paris Agreement 2050 and so on, that all sectors will be called upon to contribute, either by reducing their emissions or also increasing their carbon sink capacity. As you can see here on the left-hand side, all sectors need to decrease their emissions tremendously towards 2050. Among the main contributors towards GHG emissions are the sectors of industry, transport, and energy. Hereby, while the sectors of transport and energy are expected to decrease GHG emissions to less than 5% in 2050, the industry sector will be less significant given the current level of less diversity of cost-effective technologies available. So this might be a sector to consider. Hence, so far there have not been yet published any technologies in order to combat real change in the future. Okay, so based on the previous analysis, it makes sense to have a deeper look at the industrial, transport, and energy sector. The industrial sector represents the production and manufacturing of goods, the transport sector represents the movement of people and goods, and the energy sector represents the production and supply of energy. While the industrial sector accounts for 30% of total GHG emissions, the transport sector accounts for 25.8%, and the energy sector accounts for 18%. And even though the potential emission reduction within the energy and transport sector is much higher, around 90%, in comparison to the industrial sector, which is around 70%, the advantages the industrial sector has for introducing a technology are much more in comparison to the sector of transport and energy. On the one hand, this is because in the industry sector, you have very concentrated emissions, which are more feasible and easy to capture. Also, you have limited alternatives, as previously said also already. So you are heavily reliant on new technologies that are introduced. And also due to the horizontal nature of the sector. This horizontal nature of this sector can provide opportunities for collaboration and also knowledge sharing among companies, which can then help to drive greater resource efficiency and also GHG emission reduction. Also, in addition to that, it is notable that within the transport and energy sector, you have more alternatives already, such as fossil fuels, renewable energy sources, and electric vehicles to use, whereas in the industrial sector, as I said already, no technologies are introduced already that are very efficient. However, according to the roadmap to carbon neutrality in Portugal 2023, carbon capture and storage technologies could only have technical and economic viability within the cement sector. Nevertheless, the evolution of national cement production may not be large enough to then justify the creation of CO2 transport and subsequent storage network from an economic point of view. So what we'll do next then is to look at the industrial sector, and then within this sector to the different productions such as cement, glass, and so on, and then see which of those will be the best to enter in. So let's dive deeper into the industry sector, which seems to be the most promising sector based on the previous analysis. First of all, the industry sector accounts for 90.7% contribution to the GDP. It accounts for 15% of employment in Portugal, 60% of exported goods in Portugal, and, most important, 46 million square million tons of CO2 produced. The industry sector is made up of a wide range of activities and processes, including refining, pulp and paper, production, glass, ceramics, mineral, iron, chemicals, and so on. And 62% of CO2 emissions produced within the industry are associated with the burning of fossil fuels, and 38% are associated with the processes. And this is a regulated sector, and it's covered also by the European Emissions Trading Scheme, which we'll come back to later. This is the sector's main decarbonization instrument, which applies to 74% of the emissions. And it is forecasted that the mineral industry will continue to account for most of the greenhouse gas emissions in 2050, according to the roadmap to carbon neutrality in Portugal. And although carbon capture options are currently deemed not cost effective, as I said before in this field, Net4CO2 has the potential to fill exactly this gap with its innovative AGTS H-Pure technology. Overall, as you can see on the right-hand side, this figure represents the future roadmap of GHG emissions within the industry sector. And you can see, this is the yellow part, that the mineral industry, including cement, lime, glass, and ceramics, account for the highest, the greatest part within the GHG emissions. So overall, we can say that the pure air technologies can tackle the GHG emissions exactly in that field best, resulting from fossil fuel burning. Okay, so what can we conclude? Well, basically, we can conclude that we suggest that the air pure technology should be introduced in the industry sector within the mineral field of Portugal. So how are we going to do that? We suggest Net4CO2 to create value by providing the best performing product and service. The technology should be offered as a service, including not only the initial implementation, but also then upgrades to newer versions of the technology when they become available. By working also closely with each client, Net4CO2's team of experts can understand the unique challenges and provide tailored solutions to meet specific needs of the customers. From initial consultation to the installation, then also the maintenance and ongoing technical support, as well as updating to newer technologies, Net4CO2's comprehensive approach ensures that clients maximize the benefit of its technologies. So what we suggest is extremely important for the technology is shown on the right-hand side on the graphic. So basically it is the performance, the durability, the innovation, having a specific target, namely the mineral industry, the after-sales service by providing the technology as a service, the advising of clients on how they can introduce the technology, how they can improve further, and so on, the special relationship with clients, the competence, politeness, and the benefits of the technology. So let's dive deeper into how we want to sell the technology as a service by having a look at the marketing mix. So, first of all, in terms of product, Our differentiation factors that we suggest are functionality, performance, durability, innovation, and specific target. I'm not going to read out all the specific details here, but what is really important is the innovation part, I think. So ensuring to offer the best technology on the market through constant research and development with expert in the research lab, and that then the clients will always get the newer available technology ready from the research and development department. Then moving on in terms of service, I want to highlight all of the three. First of all, the after-sales service, which is the technical support, repair, and replacement service, as well as yearly maintenance checkups to ensure the proper functionality and longevity of the technology. Then, in terms of advertising, we suggest the active seeking and incorporation of customer feedback, and thereby ensuring products meet expectations and needs of target audience, while using knowledge to then further innovate and improve the technologies, thereby staying ahead of competition. In terms of special communication with clients, we suggest customized and personalized communication relationships for each client, including training offerings on the one hand on how to, maintain the technology, and tailored payment conditions on the other, which we will dive deeper into in the next few slides. In terms of personnel, the differentiation factors chosen are competence, obviously, while offering the best value, and politeness. And in terms of image, pointing out the benefits of the technology. So, let's summarize how we want to revolutionize the industrial carbon capture technology landscape with the airport technology by using the following value proposition, which is for clients operating within the industrial sector seeking advanced carbon capture solutions, Net4CO2's AirPure technology is the only technology among all carbon capture technologies that provides a comprehensive and all-around technology service by offering continuous product innovation delivered through innovative pricing models. So let's move on to the last. So let's have a look on how. So now that we have talked about the product. So now that we have talked about how the. So moving on, let's talk.
We are now entering the fifth and final phase of our value creation journey with Net4CO2. Now, I will guide you through Phase 5, starting specifically on Phase 5A, the business model. Starting with the business model, as you already know, Net4CO2 focus on providing advanced carbon capture solutions for the industrial sector. Their mission is to help companies reduce their carbon emissions and comply with regulations while maintaining their reputation and avoiding legal and financial penalties. At Net4CO2, they have developed a comprehensive approach to carbon capture through their innovative AirPure technology, which stands out among all carbon capture solutions. They offer a range of service including consultancy, business development, and technology research and development through its NetMix technology. Their key partners including renowned institutions such as Faculdade de Engenharia da Universidade do Porto and Instituto Superior Técnico, along with industry giants like Galp, Change Partners, Requinte Lab, and the International Iberian Nanotechnology Laboratory, contribute to their expertise and future success. With their unique value proposition, they will cater clients operating in the mineral, transport, and energy industries, targeting those with high CO2 emissions. The AirPure technology not only helps them comply with regulations, but also provides continuous product innovation delivered through innovative pricing models. Customer relationships will help the business stand out. Their dedicated after-sales team will ensure customized communication and will facilitate engagement through feedback loops, enabling co-creation with their clients. Additionally, their key account management team will focus on building relationships with potential large-scale customers. To reach its target audience, they will participate in industry forums and roundtables where potential customers will be identified. They will also employ target industry campaigns and showcase case studies to maximize their advertising reach. In terms of cost structure, Net4CO2 has fixed costs related to office and research center space, employee salaries, technology components, and support and maintenance costs. Variable costs include customer acquisition expenses and the management of customer data and transactions. Net4CO2 generates continuous revenue streams through multiple avenues. Customers pay upfront fixed costs based on the number of blocks bought, ensuring a unit cost coverage. They also have the option to purchase an annual license fee for ongoing access to Net4CO2 services, including maintenance, infrastructure use, updates to newer technology, and R&D in carbon utilization. Furthermore, they earn additional revenue through commission when trading emission certificates. In summary, Net4CO2 offers a comprehensive and all-round carbon capture solution that helps industrial companies reduce their emissions while complying with regulation. This unique business model ensures a continuous revenue stream while fostering strong customer relationships. Moving on to the 3M analysis, let's begin with manpower. The key decision makers will assume leadership roles in their respective areas of expertise. A diverse team with individuals from several backgrounds will likely generate synergetic effects, enhancing Net4CO2 overall performance. Moving on to money, the budget estimation for the market launch in 2028 is roughly 4 million. This budget encompasses several costs including patent registration, investment activities for the finalization of the technology, rent and utilities for office and research spaces, salaries for employees, marketing and advertising expenses, manufacturing and production costs, as well as other expenses. It's important to note that if additional revenue is generated through trading of emission certificates due to the saving of greenhouse gas emissions, Net4CO2 earns a provision, further bolstering its financial sustainability. Now let's focus on minutes, which represent the timeline and activities that are vital for the organization's success. In the short term, this year immediate focus includes patent registration and the development of market-ready technology, reaching technology readiness level of 8 or 9. In the short and medium term, spanning from 2023 to 2028, the priority lies in acquiring the first customers through strategic advertising campaigns. As they progress, it's expected that they scale up production and distribution capabilities, ensuring their ability to meet growing demand. In the medium and long term, Net4CO2 will continue with advertising efforts and will establish partnerships to expand market reach. Furthermore, we recognize the importance of investing in research and development, so Net4CO2 will continually improve the technology in the long term. It's essential for them to follow the Gantt chart activity schedule as it ensures the availability of first-mover advantage when entering the market within the designated time frame. In conclusion, the 3M analysis provides with a comprehensive overview of the resources and the strategic planning at Net4CO2. By joining the strengths of manpower, carefully managing money, and adhering to minutes, we are confident in Net4CO2 ability to achieve their objectives. Now, let's move to phase 5B, the KPI evaluation. While the group KPIs have been achieved, it's important to acknowledge that the business KPIs are currently lagging behind. From a business perspective, short-term KPIs include securing technology funding and gaining stakeholder approval. The technology funding of 1 million has not been secured yet, which remains a priority. However, stakeholder approval is obtained. During the course of our value creation wheel journey, we have realized that our ambitions towards the business aspect were set too high. This realization stems from the understanding that internal processes within the organization take longer than anticipated. Additionally, certain information that was expected to be readily available turned out to be unavailable such as detailed product quality information. This has impacted our ability to meet our business KPIs effectively. On the technology front, short-term KPIs revolved around creating an industrial prototype and validating an after-sales service. Net4CO2 is on the brink of achieving the creation of an industrial prototype, with field demos being the next step in the process. However, validating the after-sales service is still a work in progress, as it depends on having a market-ready technology to offer. From a group perspective, short-term KPIs focused on adherence to schedules and ensuring team satisfaction. Adherence to schedules was significantly variable among group members. While a detailed analysis can be found within our team evaluation, the overall team satisfaction is assessed as a 7.5 out of 10. And now, to finish the value creation wheel, let's discuss phase 5C, the implementation phase. The scenario analysis shed light on the huge impact of air-pure technology. This analysis examines the dimensions of the number of customers and the amount of device bought per customer, providing valuable insights into the potential savings of CO2 emissions. To ensure a comprehensive analysis, we have taken a conservative approach by considering only 20 customers in our scenario. The results of this analysis are represented in the figure, with each color indicating a specific amount of CO2 saved in tons. The red fields represent a pessimistic scenario, while the green fields represent an optimistic one. Now, let's dive into the analysis and its implications. We have discovered that with just 5 customers purchasing 100 devices each, we can achieve remarkable results. This configuration alone results in savings of over 1 million tons of CO2 emissions. To put this into perspective, let's consider the overall emissions within the mineral industry sector. According to data retrieved from the Roadmap to Carbon Neutrality, a reduction of 1 million tons of CO2 would cover 20% of the overall reduction plan for Portugal in 2030 within the mineral industry emissions. This demonstrates the significant contribution that Net4CO2 and the air-pure technology can have towards the country's carbon neutrality goals. The graph on the right illustrates how a substantial reduction in CO2 emissions can be achieved through the adoption of air-pure technology. In conclusion, the scenario analysis clearly demonstrates the transformative potential of the air-pure technology. With a conservative estimate of just 20 customers, the savings in CO2 emissions are substantial. By envisioning a future where more customers embrace the technology and increase their device count, the positive impact on emission becomes even more significant. In conclusion, let's look towards the roadmap to Net4CO2 future success. Net4CO2 is poised to make a significant impact on the carbon capture landscape. Let's outline the key steps that will lead them towards achieving their goals. Step 1. Obtain funding and investors. The first priority is to secure the necessary investment capital of 4 million. This funding will provide with the resources and stability needed to drive their mission forward. Step 2. Invest in product development. To solidify their position as a key player in carbon capture solutions, they must focus on product development. This involves patent registration and the development of an industrial prototype with a technology readiness level of 8 or 9. By advancing their technology, they ensure its effectiveness and readiness for the market. Step 3. Establish partnerships. Collaboration and partnerships are key to success. By forging strategic alliance, Net4CO2 can enhance its credibility and gain invaluable market knowledge. These partnerships will enable them to navigate the industry landscape more effectively and seize new opportunities. Step 4. Go to market. With a strong foundation in place, Net4CO2 will embark on product launch and marketing activities. This crucial step allows the company to connect with target customers, raise awareness about its innovative solutions, and demonstrate the value they bring. By effectively reaching to customers, they can drive adoption and secure a strong market position. As they follow this roadmap to success, we are confident in the positive impact Net4CO2 will have on the carbon capture sector. Their commitment to innovation, strategic partnerships, and customer-centric solutions will drive them forward.
Now, to do a wrap-up of the project, we would like to guide you through two final conclusions, one addressing the main takeaways from applying the VCW methodology, and the other one addressing our project specifically in the case of Net4CO2, and which were our main takeaways for both. Now, as for the first phase of the conclusion, we would like to share with you some main takeaways from applying the value creation wheel methodology. First, some advantages of the process. We discovered that it was a very multifunctional and flexible way of addressing challenges for, in our case, many groups within the class face different challenges, work with different companies, in unique ways, and they all manage to address very good outcomes of the situations. It also helps to overcome paradoxes and eventual tensions or conflicts, and it fosters creativity by empowering to think outside the box. As for disadvantages, we understood that something that played against us was the complexity of the industry that the company was immersed on, and therefore, because we didn't have much of technical knowledge, we had limited autonomy, and we relied constantly, and we needed constant interactions with the stakeholders and the experts in the company. It was also very time consuming, as every idea was treated independently, and as one of the learnings mentions, in many cases we required to go back and address again and again the idea, filtering with the criteria and selecting the detailed aspects of it. It's also important to have a group composition, a very stable group composition. It's important to ensure that everyone is on the same page and that everyone is meeting the deadlines at this, as the process won't allow to continue without having a very solid structure on the previous phase. And for lastly, it's important to ensure an early contact with the key decision makers, as normally the communication channels take longer, or the response time take longer than expected. Okay, now let's recap and focus on the main takeaways and lessons learned now from the side of the project working with Net4CO2. So firstly, it's important to highlight the relevance of developing technologies to combat CO2 emissions as a crucial aspect for mitigating the climate change and its impacts on human societies and ecosystems. However, during the process, we must also acknowledge that there are some important limitations that we have to face throughout the process, and its limitations such as high development costs, technical barriers, and government policies that may hinder the adoption of low carbon technologies. Now, throughout this project, we learned that collaboration across the industry with the academia and also the government is key to accelerating the development and deployment of new technologies. Also, this will accelerate reaching the targets proposed by most governments in reaching these zero emissions targets by 2050. Also, it's important to highlight that innovation and experimentation are critical for developing new approaches to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and that addressing the climate change requires large-scale deployment of low-carbon technologies, emphasizing on the importance of prioritizing scalable solutions and investing in the necessary infrastructure. And lastly, it's important to highlight the role that public engagement plays as a vital role in driving the adoption of low carbon technologies, making it essential to build awareness and address concerns regarding costs and reliability. Okay, now as we close the presentation, we would like to express our gratitude to everyone for taking the time to listen and engage with our work. Special thanks to our professors Luis Felipe Lages and Carlos Marquez for their guidance and support throughout the project. We are also extremely grateful to Net4CO2 for giving us the opportunity to work hand in hand with them and providing valuable insights and contributing to the development of innovative solutions in the climate tech field. Thank you once again for joining us today. We appreciate your interest and attention and hope that our findings and recommendations have provided valuable insights into the challenges and opportunities in the journey